The Lighthouse Keeper, the night was quiet in the way that makes a person notice their own breathing. Elias sat by the window of the lighthouse and watched the dark water turn its slow pages. A mug rested between his palms, warm at first, then simply there, like a habit he couldn't put down. The wick in the small table lamp wavered, and shadows moved across the old wood as if remembering other hands, other evenings, other winters that had drifted through this room and left without farewell. He had lived here long enough to lose the trick of counting the years. They had worn the same color, more or less, the gray of dawn, the rust of the lantern railing, the washed-out blue of distant water. There had been bright days, of course, days when the sea was polished glass and the gulls wrote white notes against the sky. But most seasons and most hours had been quiet and almost tender. Time had softened everything, including him. He used to write letters on Sundays. He used to sit at this very table, the waves rewriting the shoreline below, and he used to begin with the same words, "I hope you are well." He had meant them, truly. He had meant every word. The letters were simple, almost shy. Weather, fishermen, small repairs, the smell of chamomile he dried and hung from the rafters. He had wanted to tell her everything he didn't know how to ask in person. He had wanted the lines between them to carry warmth. The woman's name lived at the edge of his tongue like a forgotten hymn. It was not that he could not say it. It was that saying it changed the room. It put another chair at the table. It put a second shadow on the floorboards. Sometimes he spoke it into the steam rising from his mug, just to see whether the steam would carry it away. Sometimes he wrote it, and the letters looked too much like hope. The last letter he had sent had never been answered. There had been a delay, a storm, a sick child in the village across the bay, a promise to answer when things settled, and then life, which seldom consults anyone's plans. He had kept the copy of that last letter tucked into his weather log, between fog readings and lamp-cleaning notes, as if the practical world might shield the fragile. Every now and then he slipped the folded paper out and read the lines, not because he needed the words, but because the words needed someone. He leaned back and listened to the soft hum of the tower. A lighthouse speaks constantly, though not with speech anyone would expect. It speaks in salt and iron and routine. It speaks in windows that need wiping and glass that wants polishing. It speaks in ropes and pulleys, and the old steady turn of the lens that throws a path across the dark, so other lives may pass safely. Elias had learned that language the way a child learns the shape of a lullaby, by living inside it until it feels like home. At times, the quiet was heavy. It did not crush him, but it asked to be carried, and he carried it, room to room, week to week, tide to tide. He carried it like a sealed box whose contents he did not need to check again. He carried it the way one carries a memory that is not only a day from long ago, but also the way the light fell that day, and the scent of the air, and something that wanted to begin but did not. He rose and climbed the spiral steps to the lantern room. His hand traced the scratch in the rail where his lantern had once knocked, back when his hands shook from too much caffeine and too little sleep. He had made repairs then, the careful sort, and he still checked the spot. A keeper lives by such small fidelities. He turned the lens with one finger, and it turned like a patient planet, brass and glass agreeing on their purpose. Beyond the horizon was a thin thought. The world did not end there, but it took a breath. He lit the lamp. A bright pupil opened in the night, and the sea blinked. He watched the first sweep draw a pale road, watched it fall away, watched it come back. He could have watched it forever, and in a way, he had. The light had become his handwriting. Anyone who knew would recognize the steadiness. Keeping the light was keeping a promise, not only to the lives out there on the water, but to the boy he had been, who once stood on this very rock and wanted to be needed. Downstairs again, he set the mug aside and opened the weather log. He wrote the hour and the wind's slow number. He added a note about the cloud cover, a threadbare blanket of it, and another about the swell. His handwriting was neat, almost too neat, though the ink sometimes bled where the paper drank more than its share. He paused with his pen on the page, then wrote a line he had never written before. Dreamt of the village bell. He had not meant to think about the bell. It used to ring at noon and at twilight, and on Sundays it called the little church together. He had stood in the doorway more than once, a stranger familiar only as the Lighthouse Keeper, and he had listened to a hymn he knew and did not know. He had not stayed long. He had left before the last verse because he could not bear his own tenderness. It was a kind of pride, or a kind of fear. Sometimes those are the same thing. When he slept, he dreamed of small things, the red thread in her scarf, the way the sand kept a map of feet, the taste of oranges that only came to the village once a month. In one such dream, he simply held a letter and read it until the words turned into birds and flew out the open window. He woke with the window open, salt in his throat, and morning already beginning. The days passed, each with its tidings and its quiet labor. He mended a net for a boy who had waved from a skiff. He traded 2 jars of pickled beetroot for candles thick as wrists. He repaired the hinge on the outer door, the one the wind kept flirting with. He swept sand from the floor and put fresh water in a pitcher and hung a coil of rope to dry. He greeted the gull who had decided to be a regular. He watched a red sail move north like a drop of wine in water. He did not count the days, but he remembered their faces. One afternoon, late enough that the sun was already finding its softer color, a small boat cut through the calm. It was not a familiar boat. He would have known the curve of keel and the way canvas met mast. A woman sat at the stern, steady-handed, and another beside her, younger, holding a hat that only half-tamed her hair. When they were close enough, the older woman called up to him, not loudly, but as if she knew her voice would carry the right way. "Keeper," she said, and the words sounded like a greeting and a thank you and a question all at once. "We've brought bread, if you'll have it. And a letter." He inhaled as if he had been under water without knowing it. He raised a hand. He found the rope ladder easier than it had any right to be, and then he was on the small landing, the rock beneath his boots, and the air full of everything that happens when a person's life changes without the world making a fuss. Up close, the older woman's eyes were kind and tired. The younger woman's eyes were curious and bright. They had the look of family, but not of resemblance. Their faces held the same sort of courage. The older woman introduced herself, Anya, and the younger, her niece, Miran. He gave his name as if it were new. The bread was warm under its cloth. The letter was addressed in a hand that tugged at him. It was a hand that had once written to him about small things and had made those things large as love does. "It's from Lale," Anya said, and the name moved through him like a cord. "She asked me to bring it when I could. She said you would understand if it took a while." He did understand. He understood in a way that made his heart ache like a healed bone in the rain. He nodded. He thanked them and asked if they would like to step inside out of the wind. There was not much wind, but the invitation made a little home of the moment, and they accepted. The room seemed a fraction smaller with them in it, and also truer, as if the room had been a picture and suddenly had become a place. He found cups and poured water, cool and clean, because coffee would have been too much, and tea would have asked too many questions. He set the bread on a board and sliced it with the knife that kept its edge just shy of danger. They ate slowly and said ordinary things to one another, about the weather, about the small delay in the tide schedule, about the fish that had been abundant this week. The ordinary words were a bridge. He was grateful for every plank. When at last he unfolded the letter, he did it gently, as if the paper might have been fragile with time. It wasn't, but the words were. He read them once, and then he read them again, and then he placed his hand upon them as if to warm them. He did not ask the women to look away. He did not need to hide what moved through his face. He was the keeper of the lighthouse, and the light had taught him something about being seen. Lale's letter was not long. It began as his letters had once begun. "I hope you are well." It told him she had left the village some years ago and had made a life further inland, where the sea was a long rumor and the fields gave a different kind of rhythm to the day. She wrote that she had married, and then later that she had been widowed. She wrote that she had a daughter who had eyes that looked east first thing in the morning. She wrote that she had never stopped thinking of the lighthouse as a kind of heartbeat she could hear if she stood very still. She wrote that she had wanted to visit many times and had not managed it and now was not certain she should. She wrote that she hoped he would